Thanks for joining us today for the Buffalo State Data Science Analytics Spring 2021 Seminar Series. So I'm Joaquin Carbonara, the chair of the DSA program, and I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Nick Gilewski. So Nick is the Outage Coordinator and Operations Supervisor for the New York State Power Authority, where he facilitates and manages operations in the Lewiston, New York control room. Nick has over 20 years of experience managing employees and has 6 Sigma Green Belt certification related to organizational continuous improvement, statistical quality control, and lean manufacturing. Nick received a master's degree in engineering from the University of Buffalo, an MBA from Medaille College, and a PhD in leadership and policy from Niagara University. Today, Nick will be speaking about why data analytics is so important in understanding the smart electric grid and renewable energy in regulated and deregulated states.
All right. So, as mentioned, Dr. Nick Gilewski. And before I get started, I'd like to thank Buff State especially for having me today presenting information on data analytics and the smart grid. Before I get started going over my topic, I want you to notice a quote at the bottom of the screen, and that is, however beautiful the strategy, you should occasionally look at the results, which is by Winston Churchill. And that's very important when you're looking at data analytics, because you must do it in an unbiased manner. When you collect data, we can all skew the data. We can collect certain particular pieces or information that we want to derive a certain result. However, when you're doing research and collecting data, you must do it in an unbiased manner, because when you finish doing your research and you do the analytics, you may find that what you were looking for is not what you actually get. So you must do it in an unbiased manner. Today, I'm going to cover a lot in a little short period of time. And there's a reason why I want to cover a lot, is because when we derive an analysis and we create statistics from the data, we need to know pretty much everything about the topic so that we can fully explain it and accurately explain it. So that, hence there's a lot of information. So we're going to be covering the electric grid, deregulated and regulated states, NERC, FERC, and grid regions, renewable energy, the New York State ISO in particular, and then how all of those combined can create some data analytics, and which we can make decisions based on that data for a smarter grid. Any questions thus far? We're good, Heather? Okay. All right. The US electric grid is the largest interconnected machine on Earth. 200,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines and 5.5 million miles of local distribution lines that link generating plants, factories, homes, and businesses, which are governed by the federal, state, and local rules. With such an enormity and complex system between different states and different countries, it is vital for a governance over the grid and the machine within the United States and outside of the United States. Hence, NERC, which when I refer to NERC is the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and then FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So NERC and FERC. In this image in front of you, you will see that there are particular regions that I want to draw your attention to, and that is Southeast, which is the bottom right portion of the United States, which is brown, ERCOT, which is blue, which is Texas, Southwest, Arizona, that area, and Northwest region as well. The other regions that have an ISO next to it, or SPP, PMG, PJM, those particular entities or regions are governed by a transmission operator or an ISO, which is independent system operator. The others in the Southwest region, Southwest region, and Northwest region are not governed by a system. They are actually governed by wholesale electricity markets, where it's frequently, they're referred to as vertically integrated. The generation, transmission, distribution is owned by all one company. Whereas in, say, New York, it is not owned by just one company. And an example would be Florida. I would like to key in just on Florida. So Florida is not operated by an ISO or RTO. And Florida has a commission that oversees 54 electric utilities that are bundled together to give the customer the transmission, the generation, distribution, everything. But there's a commission that oversees it so that it's not a monopoly and that they can't just charge whatever they want arbitrarily. So that's important as we look at this map. There are certain regions that are under a typical bulk power system, and then certain regions that are governed under an independent system operator. So as we move forward, you're going to find that it's extremely complex. So when you're gathering your data, you need to understand these things and how, you know, that could affect your results. Another thing, as we delve into the United States, we look at, as I had mentioned, some are operated by independent system operators, some are individually owned and operated. And I gave Florida as an example. In this particular slide here, which I did with Geographical Information Systems, GIS, you will see that there's certain deregulated and regulated states. In particular, there's 18 deregulated and 33 regulated states. And what that is, and I would like to read this to you verbatim, because when you're collecting data and when you're doing an analysis, you just can't wing it. I can tell you, you know, what my take on it is, but I would like to just read this one in particular when it comes to deregulated and regulated states. So deregulated states allows for the entrance of competitors to buy and sell electricity by permitting market participants to invest in power plants and transmission lines. Generation owners then sell wholesale electricity to retail suppliers. Retail electricity suppliers set prices for consumers. The term deregulated refers to deregulated electricity market. Prices are set by a market, not directly by a regulator. So regulated is the opposite. And there's 33 of those in the United States. The utility company owns the infrastructure, transmission lines, then sells directly to its customers. In regulated states, utilities must abide by electricity rates set by the State Public Utility Commission. An example is Florida. And this type of market is often considered or could be misconstrued as a monopoly due to the limitations on consumer choice. And why they say that is that in New York, you have a choice. You can buy your power from National Grid, or you can buy your power from a third-party company. And I really don't even, I know there are some out there right now that you could choose to buy from, but you have an option, and that's what is considered a deregulated state. In a regulated state, you do not have an option. It's almost like getting cable. and this is where I can, expound on, is that you have cable. You can either get it from Adelphia or maybe Verizon. So you have an option. You're still getting cable, but you have an option. You can look at customer service. You can look at price, cost, maybe reliability. So that's the difference. So now we have the first slide, which shows you separate entities or regions within the United States. And now you have another set of underlying regions, which are deregulated and regulated states. All important as we gather data. And I had mentioned in the beginning that you have NERC, which oversees the reliability of the grid. And it's NERC and not a federal organization, because we have an interconnecting line with outside the United States, with Ontario. So the federal can't actually oversee that due to that one set of details, but they also have their own responsibilities, NERC and FERC. And so their responsibility is reliability, just reliability. And they actually have regions here that are interconnected, except for Texas. It's not in it. It's its own separate entity, and the others are interconnected. And NERC is extremely important. And I can give you an example what NERC would be for, and that would be to make sure that if you were, I'm going to give you an example that you could delineate between NERC and FERC. And that would be if you were to open a power plant. Now it could be, we'll go with a hydro plant, and you also have a pump plant which has a reservoir. Well, you would have to get permission from FERC, as long as it's in the United States, to build that plant. And FERC's responsibility is to make sure that it's safe and that it's not putting anyone in harm's way. And they look at the environment, they look at a lot of different things, but you submit an application for that. They look at if the dam were to fail, what plans do you have, and is it set up in the right spot within the United States? Obviously, you don't want a dam in the middle of New York City. So you have to submit to it, they review it, review the records, and provide you authority to build that. NERC actually is, once it is built, it looks at if you state that you can run 500 megawatts, for example, and you're going to bid into the bulk power system, you're going to affect it. Well, they want to make sure that, okay, how reliable is this power producing plant? And so you have to regularly do tests, make sure what you state is true, and you don't affect negatively the bulk power system. So those are important differences when it comes to the United States and as we mentioned, FERC outside of the United States. And here is another map. So you can see how many levels there are within the United States and how complicated it actually can be when we start to look at smart grid and renewable energy. FERC, here's another map where I left out the Southwest pool and the Southeast pool, and these are just the transmission regions that are owned and operated by an ISO. And again, it's just for bulk power, not distribution, just bulk power generation. Okay, now we're going to get into renewable energy. And that is, there are several different types of renewable energy. And we all know that there's several types of regular energy. You have coal, natural fuel, you have oil, nuclear. There are several different types of energy. And each type of energy has a different characteristic, which plays a very important role on a balanced grid. So now we're introducing some renewable energy. We have solar, wind, geothermal, hydroelectric, biomass, tidal energy. And in 2017, for what it's worth, I want to state how many megawatts were generated in the United States. And that was 686,610,427,000 megawatts. And then we generated above and beyond that, not renewable, a total of 4 trillion down below there. And that equates to about 17% of renewable energy that went onto the grid in 2017. I should say only 17%. And historically, we are growing with renewable energy, and it's very important, but we must do it tactfully, we must do it strategically, and we must do it based on data. Purely on data, not political, just on data. And it's very important to remember that. Just the facts. So I gave you an overview of what it looked like for Florida, how they distribute power. It's a public commission in Florida that looks at it. It's typically owned and operated and distributed and transmitted all the way across to the end user, one company. In New York, there is one organization that oversees the bulk power generation, which is the New York State ISO. And their mission is that they're unaffiliated with market interests, and their mission is to serve the public under the oversight of state, federal, and reliability organizations. So as you can see in their mission statement, they mentioned FERC, NERC. There's actually in New York, as you can imagine, there's some other service commissions and councils and reliability commissions in New York because it's such a dense populated area. And so they're dedicated to reliable, sustainable power grid and competitive markets. They maintain, their priority is reliability. Their next is cost. And now as they're introducing this, planning the bulk power system for the future, and that's looking at renewables as we start to converge with renewables. So I've explained to you the grid, the regions. It's broke up into deregulated and regulated states. It's overseen by either a commission, FERC, NERC, and state, local, and federal are all involved as we try and bring renewables to the grid, yet making it economical and reliable and greener, obviously. So we look at all of those things and we're collecting our data, and we need to still bore down even another layer. And so we just generalized with Florida. And now we are going to look at New York State and look at it and its intricacies on how they create prices and how they inject renewable energy into the system. So right here in front of you, you'll see that this is the New York State ISO. Anyone can go to this website. You can, you don't have to sign in, log in. You can actually go to newyorkstateiso.gov and view this information 24/7, round the clock. What we have in front of us is what's called, on the left, my left, is a day ahead market. And it's set up into regions. So now we talked about the contiguous United States minus Texas. And now we're looking at a smaller region, which is New York. And now we're looking at smaller regions within New York. And it is set up into several different zones. And the important thing with with New York is that they're interconnected with adjacent states, which is good, but also can be bad. And I'll explain. Why it could be bad is if for some reason a adjacent state had an issue with lines tripping or a frequency issue that actually could make its way up to New York State. But also being that it's almost mechanically interconnected. You can think of it that way. So as one part becomes out of sync, the other part can actually bring it into sync. So it's a good thing if it all works well, and it's a bad thing if it doesn't, because you can cause a rolling blackout all the way up the coast or in the Western region, anywhere. But if you have little variations, even a pretty good variation, and you're all interconnected, it will bring it back into sync, which is great. And that's ideal, and that's what we want. And when New York State, the day before, every day, New York State looks at what they project for power. And I'm going to give you an example quickly. And that is that in a region, let's look at this map in the Western region, which is West-A. In that region, I'm going to just throw out an arbitrary number, and that's 500 megawatts they need in that region. And they need it, it's based on every hour, and day ahead price for the Western region is $22.71 for bulk power. That just means that it's there readily available to distribute to homes, companies, manufacturing facilities, wherever. So they look at, all right, we've got a region, we need 500 megawatts. And every day power plants, whether it be a gas plant, a renewable energy plant, a solar plant, a nuclear plant, they put in bids. And they say, well, today I'm going to bid $20 for a megawatt of power. And the New York State ISO looks at, first, they need to make sure they have the margin. If they're asking, they want to procure 500 megawatts of power for the next day, they have to procure that based on reliability and based on price. So if in a region, people are bidding and they get selected, they've already, gone through that NERC process, and they're going to get selected, and they know that next day that they're going to be running 100 megawatts. So everybody gets to bid into it, and the cheapest price gets selected first. One problem is that let's say that 500 megawatts is going across only, 2 or 3 lines, and that line can only handle so many megawatts. So you have to get it, there's a constraint, and you have to get the power from another power plant. So then if it's $20 a megawatt, maybe the next one that's available in a different location, it might be $22 for that megawatt. So very, very complicated system. And why it's pertinent to this topic is a couple of reasons. One would be that, solar fields, farms, they can bid into the market, and they can outbid, meaning cheaper, for a certain region, and they get it. All right. and this is very, very important. They get the bid for, let's say, 100 megawatts, right? And it's a solar. And that day comes and everything's looking good. They're producing 100 megawatts, you know, at, I don't know, say it started at 11 o'clock and they're supposed to go till 4, it's in the summer, and they can do that. They're producing 100 megawatts, they're chugging along, and the clouds go over. Now they're only down to 70 megawatts, or even dark clouds go over and they didn't forecast that they weren't going to be able to produce 100 megawatts. They thought it was clear skies. So now the New York State ISO says real time. So you can see on the tab there that there's a day ahead in real time. They have to get that power from somewhere. And not only do they have to get that power from somewhere, they have to get it immediately, within milliseconds. Because once the grid frequency goes down 1 hertz, we're done. All right, so they have to get it immediately. Where are they going to get it from? Well, a nuke plant takes an hour to start, or maybe even 8 hours, depending on the size of it. Maybe a natural fuel plant, that takes several minutes to start, maybe even an hour to start. You can pick it up from hydro. They're very quick, but we need it now. We need it instantly. The only way you can do that is to have energy, spinning energy procured, ready to go, just in case that fails, or just in case the clouds roll over or the wind stops. So now you have to have spinning energy with inertia, real inertia, on the side, ready to go at a moment's notice, and it's not free. You have to actually pay for that. That's how complicated this system gets. And when you're doing data analytics and analyzing the data, you need to be cognizant of everything. And that is so vitally important because, again, you can skew your data any way you want. You know, one way I didn't even mention that, you know, could misrepresent what you just heard was, okay, let's say coal. I'm going to use coal as an example, and I'm also going to use renewable in a minute, but let's say coal is getting some money from the government to run, some stimulus money, and they bid into the market coal. The average going rate might be $20 a megawatt. They're going to bid into the market at $1 because they're getting subsidized $19. So therein lies a problem. And with renewables, same thing. It's not just renewable that's getting subsidized. A lot of other facilities are getting subsidized as well. But that's very important because you can pull up this real-time chart. We could be importing power from Canada and it may be negative into New York State. In other words, they're paying us to get rid of their power, and it happens. And so those are pieces of data and information you need to evaluate as you move forward with data analytics. You need to look at the whole picture. Anyone have any questions before I move on as far as procuring bulk power? I could go into a lot more details on how it's selected in real time. You know, just one thing is that every 5 minutes, the price changes, but every 6 seconds, certain plants within a certain region get a pulse to either go up or down, and they're getting paid for that all the time. Every pulse they get, they're regulating the capacity in the market to up and down. And so, not that it's an issue or a problem, but if you have renewable energy that may not always be consistent. You have to have a source that is consistent. And we have to figure out as engineers, researchers, on how we're going to do that so that it's reliable, consistent, and has inertia. Now, as far as renewable energy, smart grid, regulations, anything to do with electricity, I have some resources here. And I'm going to bounce over now to, I'm going to try to bounce over to show you just real quick where the best repository of information for renewables and smart grid technology would be. And that is at the EIA, Energy Information Administration. So we're going to bounce over to two places, EIA, and then we're also just, I'm going to show you the New York State ISO so that if anybody's looking at doing any research, you know exactly where to go and you can pull this data from the New York State ISO. So again, it's EIA.gov. And right now I'm looking at total energy, and I can go down to data, look at annual, I can look at renewables, and there are, I mean, you could get lost in this website here as I did writing my dissertation, but you could look at renewable energy consumption for residential and commercial sectors. Now they do offer everything in a CSV file and an XLS file or a PDF. In fact, the PDF is somewhat new because a couple of years ago when I did this, they didn't have the PDF. But when you want to extrapolate data, it's hard to do and do an analysis in a PDF. So, you know, a CSV or an XLS files. But just quick, we can just take a look at it. And again, this is all in there for anyone to access, and you can look at by year renewable energy consumption. Now, you know, again, you're looking at data. What's the difference between consumption and generation? Well, you know, a certain state or region could be generating it. That doesn't mean they're using all of it. And a certain region could be consuming it all. That doesn't mean that that state is generating it all. Now that we have bilateral arrangements with Ontario and other ISOs, we could actually be utilizing their renewable energy and not our own. In other words, we could say we're consuming 80% renewable energy, but we haven't generated 40 of it. So again, the data you've got to look at and do your due diligence on how accurate. This website, there's none better out there when it comes to energy. And it's funded by the government, highly recommended, extremely accurate. In fact, they go through and review it every once in a while. After the initial data is done for the year, they'll go back and someone will do a review on it, and they'll upload any changes, and they'll have revision, you know, 1, 2, or 3 if they find any mistakes. Now I'm going to just jump over to the New York State ISO, and again, it's actually it's NYISO.com, not gov. So anybody can access this. Go right to markets. You can go to the real-time dashboard, which is where I had the screenshot of, and you can see that the day-ahead market right now is anywhere from 24 to 72 megawatts in Long Island, which could be gas shortage there, possibly, just a guess. But you can also look at the real time. So this is what's happening right now. This is what was planned day ahead. This is real time. All right, so I'm gonna jump back. It was 72 $2 in Long Island. That's day ahead. Something happened. They're utilizing more than projected, and that caused the price to go up to $125 per megawatt. Whereas in the West region, it's only $5 a megawatt, which is extremely low. And the day ahead, they were projecting $24. And it's ever changing. And you can see here's one negative price right now. And it happens. And you can see where the power is coming from, Canada. And they're literally paying to give us the power in New York right now. And it doesn't always work like that. Now, I just want to, for reference, and what happened in Texas, you can see right here what the day ahead market was in the real time. It varied a little bit, right? You know, some places, a line could have tripped, something could have happened that created that congestion causing the price to spike. I don't know, gas shortage, it could have been a lot of things. So we're looking at $125 a megawatt. Anybody guess what per megawatt it was running in Texas during their outage there?
I'm going to say thousands.
$9,999 per
Whoa!
megawatt. So, and you know, I don't want to speculate on what had happened. Again, I could speculate, surmise, but until I can say with confidence, I won't really do that. I mean, I might talk with amongst peers in that and speculate, but until you sit down and you look at the hard factual data, not political, the data, then as an engineer or a data scientist, you can conclude what really happened, and you could connect the dots on what happened in Texas. So one more thing is you can look at everything. This is an open forum. There are certain things that's protected, but you can look at outages, you can look at pricing data, you can look at historical pricing data. So if I wanted to look at zonal, and I wanted to look at what it was for a certain region zone, local base marginal price, I can see all that information, and you again want it in an Excel spreadsheet. Makes it easier to extrapolate the data. So very powerful tool if you're going to be doing anything renewable energy. Two key things if it's going to be in New York State. If not, you can do it. Casio is in California. I mean, they have great websites. I've spoken to a lot of the people there. They're very helpful when it comes to data, and there's not much that's proprietary as far as, you know, obviously futures are proprietary as far as, you know, if our line were out and when it was going to be back, you don't want to, can't disclose that information. So let's jump back to the PowerPoint. All right, and again, I just to briefly touch on some of the data analysis that you could quantitative is multivariate analysis with different variables, several, not just two. You could do 6 or 7 of them. You can do Pearson correlations with some of the data, linear regressions, and descriptive and inferential statistics. Again, the only thing I caution you on is inferential statistics. You can infer a lot, but you have to provide accurate data that reflects the results and not skew it. And just one thing that I want to share with you, you know, out of my, from my dissertation, I had looked at 7 years, 2007 to 2017, 11 different years. I had to break up. You had the 33 regulated states, 18 deregulated states. And I had to go to EIA website, download all of it, break it up into deregulated because they don't offer it in deregulated and regulated states. So I had to do that for an 11-year period just for this one linear regression. It takes a long time, but it's well worth it. And so you can see that is actually true and factual, that renewable energy generation has increased 51% and almost 51% in deregulated and regulated states over the 11-year period. So that's a good thing. There's no discrepancy between the two, which is great. Which some people may argue that, well, it's easier to get renewable energy in regulated states versus deregulated. Well, I might agree with you. I may say, yeah, that's great. I agree. I concur with that statement. And then you look at the data and you say, well, I don't know. It doesn't look like that based on the data. And then a good thing, with the increase in renewable energy, also looked at in each state, deregulated and regulated, grouped the CO2 carbon emissions that decreased. And again, they were comparable, 29% in deregulated and 26% in regulated. There were other variables that and graphs and charts and analyses that I ran and that it'd take me a couple hours to share with you, but I did 7 different variables, and these were just 2 graphs that from my results. Now, I just like to leave you with that after you've heard everything and you see how complex it is, you can't eat an elephant in one sitting. If you do research and you collect data, it takes time. You just have to slowly, methodically do it and derive your results and in an unbiased manner. And I leave you with that, and then a couple of possible future research for renewables on a smart grid. And before I go over those, I'd just like to mention the smart grid. So the digitization and the smart grid, they are, within the US, they're looking at, well, I could give you an example of one smart grid concept, and that is during certain periods of the year, a line can pass so many megawatts across that line, and it's based on, well, seasonal. Well, if you had temperature sensors on that line in certain areas, and it was well below that seasonal average temperature, you could actually pass more wattage through that. So to maximize that, you would need sensors on the grid. That's one application. And as you know, there are hundreds when it comes to renewable energy being injected into the system. The more data you have, hopefully the better the results will be on introducing renewable energy and creating a very reliable, stable grid. Lastly, some further research in renewables I could offer you that is there a correlation between renewables and grid reliability? That one's a tough one because grid reliability it's a measured thing and they just started it. Well, has it? Some people might argue, well, renewables, the more renewables, the less reliable the grid. Well, the only way you can do that is through data. Is there a cost associated with an increase of renewables? Is there a correlation to digitization and cost per kilowatt hour? And how will EVs impact the grid in New York? Do we have the capacity? What can we add as far as a smart grid to help with that, to be able to, I think by 2030, they want to have 50% electrical vehicles. What can we do? And then lastly, is there a correlation between renewables and the decrease? Is there a correlation to renewables, and does it decrease asthma? That'd be one that people could further, and I think people have done that, but I'm just giving you examples on what you can do as far as data analysis. And that's it.
How much loss in energy is there in all power lines, and how does that affect the calculations?
Well, a power line, old power lines, really, there's not much of a loss. It's either copper or aluminum, and the degradation of a line is minimal. I can't state, you know, if there's a capacitance value that the Ferranti effect, that may have something to do with it, but I can't accurately answer that question as far as if you had a brand new line with the same diameter and ampacity versus an old line that may have some degradation to it. There may be some loss. I can't guess on that one, but that's a great question, and I can get back to you on that one.
Following up on that question, we know that there is a lot of maintenance that highways need, right? And there is hope, maybe some people say not enough money going into maintaining our infrastructure. Do you think that the energy infrastructure is in need of an update or repair?
Yes, yeah. I just my opinion, not my mine. It's just my own opinion, is that we have during the summer, New York is pretty much maximized the line ampacity and capacity. And if we have EVs coming up, we're going to need some new larger sized lines and or flexibility as far as, I think Lucid automobiles, they have a EV now that it either can charge or put power back onto the grid. So we need to look at versatility, but absolutely. And I believe, you know, I've read some articles and they're installing some new line. I think everywhere in the United States, they're installing new lines because they know that there's going to be an increased demand out there when it comes to EV vehicles. But yes, the infrastructure is old and it definitely could be upgraded and additional lines put in.
Yeah, as a follow-up, the big California fire a couple of years ago was blamed on age power towers, and that was one of the motivations for his question. And then he's also asking if there is a reliable source of information for geothermal in Western New York.
I do know, I actually know a few people who have geothermal, and they like it. It's costly. The return on investment is 20, 30 years, but people feel better about it going green. And, you know, maybe with this new administration, there'll be more incentives when it comes to geothermal. But in New York State, they actually do. You have to go a little bit deeper, but yeah, there's some demand for it, and it's a decent return on investment. And the fires, all I could say is I can't really comment on the fires themselves, but I do know that each line requires maintenance. There's insulators between the tower and the line, and those insulators have to be cleaned. And I know that, you know, utility companies fly up and down those lines and look for infrared thermography hotspots. And when they find them, then they take the outage and clean it. And if for some reason that line is too hot and they feel it's an unsafe condition and could cause a catastrophic failure, they'll take out the line immediately. So again, that's where NERC and FERC, you know, roll up into this, that as far as reliability would be NERC. And that's a regulatory compliance issue that they have to do.
He says, obviously there is a lot of data out there and analysis being done. Do you feel like, at least as far as power and renewables go, that analysis is making a significant difference in how we are moving forward with the way energy is generated, transmitted, and distributed and treated as a business?
I do. I think sometimes, no pun intended, trial by fire, but I know that we've introduced, and when I say we, United States has introduced a lot of renewables. We're up to 17% in 2017. By now, we could be up to 25%. Again, I could have done that linear regression. I could probably tell you exactly where, because the confidence was about 93% on those regressions. So I could tell you confidently where it would be. But yes, they are introducing a lot of renewable energy, and we haven't seen many failures and/or outages that I know of that are solely due to renewable energy. But I do know that they introduced a lot, rushed it to the table, got renewables. You have to get it out there and see what happens. We are starting to see that they're recognizing the need for batteries. They're recognizing possibly the need for a small nuke plant or real inertia on the grid. And that's where, as you said, where engineers and data scientists come together, it has to happen that way, where you just can't have a data scientist, you just can't have an engineer. You have to work as a composite crew to derive an accurate assessment.
Great, great. That's an excellent way to end our presentation today. It's a bright future for energy, I hope, in this country. And thanks everybody for coming. Thanks so much, Dr. Gilewski, for your presentation. It really hit the spot. I think that it addressed all the things that we were looking for in it. And we're looking forward to more collaborations with you.